I'm really pleased to say that today I'm going to be taking a look at the Fantastic Four Marvel Legends Retro Wave. Now, there's actually 6 figures in this wave, but only the first 4 have seem to have been released so far, so I'm still waiting for the other 2 to come out. But I thought I'll do 2 videos. I'll do this first video looking at these first 4 because, of course, they've just arrived, and then I'll take a look at the other 2 in another video because there's also a handful of special releases that I've also ordered that I can also cover in that video as well. So what's the deal? Why am I so excited about these figures in particular? Well, it's because Hasbro is really tapping into the nostalgia vein. In recent years, they've been experimenting with looking at figure lines that were produced in the very late 80s and very early 90s, and then basically re-releasing those figures, updated of course with Marvel Legends articulation and sculpting and detailing, but wrapped up in the same packaging, although scaled up, that they were originally placed in all those years ago. Last year they targeted the Spider-Man animated series with that wonderful purple packaging of the cityscape behind them, and I will do a video on some of them because there are quite a few in that lineup and they're continually expanding it. And that was a really fun, exciting line because they're introducing characters that were never part of the animated series, so it's really nice to see that card art with them on it because we would have seen what that would have looked like. And then this year they announced they were doing the Fantastic Four. And for those who aren't aware, in the very early 90s, Marvel launched several animated series, including Spider-Man, the X-Men, but they also had the Marvel Action Hour, and in this hour they had the Fantastic Four and Iron Man. I remember this being super exciting because these animated shows were actually the gateway for me to explore these characters because I hadn't seen them before, I wasn't necessarily reading them in the comics, and this is my introduction to a great many of them. So I have a lot of affection for these cartoons, and in particular, the Fantastic Four was one that I was really into. Now, the cartoon itself is definitely a mixed bag. There's some strange things in there, but there's actually a lot of good stuff as well. It was certainly bright and colourful, and it definitely captured the feel of what the Fantastic Four are all about, i.e. fun. And of course, there was a supporting toy line to go along with it. Now, I absolutely love this toy line, and in particular, I love the card art. Here's an example of the Galactus figure that went with this line, and you can just see that it's just really wonderfully illustrated, it's really evocative, you can see all the characters on there, it just looks really exciting and fun even to this day. And as you can see, Hasbro has definitely tried to recreate this packaging by recapturing that circular bubble that we have on the front of the packaging, and also of course the logo and the blue card behind it, which is absolutely brilliant. And for me, this is a really exciting idea, being able to essentially update my childhood collection, but fitting in with my Marvel Legends universe. And they've done a pretty fantastic job of recreating that packaging there, and all the graphics are exactly the same, which is absolutely brilliant. The only criticism I'd have is that the Fantastic Four logo itself used to be holographic, and they haven't done that here. So that feels a bit cheap and a little bit disappointing because it was a really nice shiny holographic effect. It was something I really loved about the original card art, and it's a shame that that hasn't been replicated. But I do think they've done a fantastic job of everything else. Even this character card here, this placeholder at the very bottom, I think is fantastic. It's captured the same, obviously, typography that they use, but also that image there, and it's quite clearly the thing from the animated series, so this definitely ticks all the boxes for me. And when we flip the packaging over on the reverse, we can see they've even replicated the reverse of the card as well, which is brilliant. So again, we can see that image of the thing there, which is fantastic. They've got the same blurb in the same text box as the character, and even the instructions about the features of the toy as well, which is fantastic. Here's an example of the reverse of one of the original cards, and in this case it was Thanos, and we can see it is pretty much identical, the same scheme, the same idea, it's just absolutely brilliant. And you'll notice as well, at the bottom of this packaging we can see all the other figures that are in this line, both the Fantastic Four and the Iron Man, so these are the Marvel Action Hour animated series figures. And again, pleasingly, Hasbro tried to recreate that effect here for this line of figures, so we can just see the 6 figures in this Fantastic Four wave, but surely it can't be long before we get an Iron Man wave as well. And here we have the full lineup of all 4 of these characters and the reverse of their packaging here, so we can see all the artwork across them is consistent and in this style, which is really lovely. I also think that this is just a lot more displayable, a lot more fun, a lot more visually interesting if you're going to put them on your wall or on your shelf. I think these are just really very attractive and much better than what we normally get with the Marvel Legends line. This is just, yeah, they really pop, they're really colourful and fun. So looking at the figures themselves, I'm going to start with the Thing because he was always my favourite. The first thing you'll probably notice is that this is pretty much a re-release of the Thing that was moulded and sculpted a few years ago for a Fantastic Four line that was released exclusively through Walgreens, I believe, and it was subsequently used again for the recent Dan Slott run inspired wave. Now I have mixed feelings about this because on the one hand I never got that version of the Thing and I didn't really want the Dan Slott run because I haven't read those comics yet. But I do really like this sculpt. We've had a number of different things across the years, but this is the first one that, in the Marvel Legends line, really captures this sort of all the grooves and rockiness of the Thing, which is absolutely brilliant. On the downside, though, what I would say is that it doesn't really capture the animated series version of the character, which is kind of what it's pretending to be in terms of the packaging. So, because obviously that version of the Thing was very smooth and had a very distinctive look that they haven't captured here at all, and I don't believe there's any attempt to. What they've done really is just give it a different paint job and put it in that packaging. Now, I don't mind this too much because I do think the sculpt is absolutely brilliant, and this can also serve as a 90s thing from the comic books as well, so I think there's a little bit of scope for creative license here, and I think this definitely gets away with it. So how does this version of the Thing differ from the previous release versions? Well, it's all down to the paint apps. So you may notice there's two tones on this Thing figure in key places. Overall, there's the base plastic orange, which is a sort of a deep orange, and then on the top of the shoulders and across the chest here, and in certain places on the arms and the feet, there's some lighter shading. This is a sort of a lighter orange, almost yellow kind of look. This gives it a bit more, I suppose, lighting effects to the figure. I'm not overly convinced by it. It does look a little bit distracting to me, to be honest. In this instance, although I do love shading on my figures, without the exception of maybe a black wash that could have run through it to really accentuate all the little grooves, I'm not sure this sort of yellowy shading really helps enhance the figure at all. It looks a little bit incongruous to me. The other key difference, of course, is his colouring when it comes to his pants. So he has the blue and the white, rather than say the blue and the black, which is the traditional look. And this definitely places it as being part of the animated series, or like I said, the 90s comics. So how does he fare in terms of articulation? Well, as you'd expect, pretty well. His head, of course, is on a ball joint, so he can spin his head right the way around, and it looks up and down. Now, it looks down a pretty good distance. It doesn't really look up an awful lot. He does have the ball jointed shoulders. These arms kick up and out all the way there, which is pretty fantastic, pardon the pun. And he also has a pin swivel at the elbow as well. So there's no bicep swivel, but there is a pin swivel at the elbow. So the lower arm can swivel right the way around, and of course it hinges to 90 degrees. There's also a pin swivel at the wrist as well, so again his hands can rotate all the way around and they arch forwards and backwards. Now there is that big joint there which you might be able to see, which does stick out if you bend the hand right the way back, which can be a little bit distracting, but otherwise, looks pretty solid, and given that he is a jagged rocky character, it doesn't really matter too much, to be honest. Now he's also got articulation in the upper chest there, so he can move around from side to side, but he can't really tilt that much or bend forwards or backwards as you might hope. There's a little bit of give, but not a lot to really pose him successfully. He's also got a swivel at the waist, so of course he can spin right the way around. He's got the ball jointed hips, so of course his legs kick out. There's also a swivel at the upper thigh, which is great, and he can kick his legs forwards and backwards a little bit as well, which is pretty cool. And he's got double jointed knees, so of course they bend right the way back, which is great for such a large character. And he's also got the ankle pivot as well, so that swivels from side to side and arches a really good distance forwards and backwards as well, so no complaints here whatsoever. He also comes with a couple of extra accessories as well, including an alternate head, and I have to say I'm really glad they included this because I really like this head sculpt. It's much better than the default one that he comes with in the packaging, which looks too gummy for my liking. It doesn't really ring true, but I really love the white of the teeth on this, which is fantastic. And he comes with an extra pair of closed fists as well, which is brilliant. So overall for me, I have to say I absolutely love this figure. He's easily a 4-star. I was tempted to give him 5, but like I said, that paint job there, I just find it a little bit distracting, unfortunately. And I think also he's a little bit let down by that chest articulation there, because I think he should really be able to lean forwards and backwards with that articulation. But otherwise, I absolutely love him. I think Overall, the sculpt of this figure is fantastic. He's probably my favourite Thing figure, I think, to date. I think they've just done a great job of him. I really love that he comes with 2 heads, particularly this head. I think this perfectly encapsulates what I expect from the Thing, which is fantastic. And I love that he's got these alternate hands as well. I think it's really, really good. And of course, for me, big kick seeing him in the blue and white. That is my personal favourite look, so I feel like I kind of have my definitive Thing now. But I appreciate that if you've already picked up this version of the Thing in a different paint job, because from either the 2 previous releases, then you may feel that this is, a release too far, unless you're really, really into the animated series like myself and you really want that card art, on your wall. Then, then I think he's still worth it. But yeah, otherwise, you may not want to double dip. Next up, we have Reed Richards' Mr. Fantastic. Now, this is the same sculpt as we saw with the Walgreens Mr. Fantastic, but almost everything else is completely different. For starters, the most obvious example, of course, is the lab coat. I think this is a fantastic touch. I don't believe we've had this before, at least not from Hasbro. And I think this is a real nice touch because obviously Reed is often in his lab, so I think this is really cool. Of course, it is that flexible rubber, so it does pull apart so we can see the costume underneath. There's not an awful lot of detailing on it. Well, there's not bad detailing, there's buttons and things like that and pockets, but there's no paint wash over them to really make them look realistic or make them look shaded and things, so it does look a little bit plasticky, unfortunately. But that said, I am pleased to say that this is an optional extra because they have designed the figure so you can have 2 very distinct looks, one with the coat and one without. And of course, his colouring is significantly different. Again, this is the blue and white. Now, the only criticism I'd have here is that I think the blue is maybe a little bit too dark. It probably should have been a little bit brighter if it was going to be from the animated series. And for those who didn't get the Walgreens Mr. Fantastic, they've basically reused the Spider-Man body, so I'm not entirely sure whether this is the most appropriate sculpt. It works perfectly fine, but it does feel a little bit off somehow. But I really do like the head sculpt. I think they've done a fantastic job of this. He's got the silver in his hair, and I think this, definitely replicates again what I think of as Mr. Fantastic. So I think they've done a really good job of this. The only disappointment for me is that on mine, the paint apps are a little bit skewed on the actual torso. So there's a white scrape mark on the top of his chest there, which is a little bit disappointing. Hopefully that wouldn't happen to you, but something to be aware of. The articulation is strong as you would expect, so he has the ball jointed head there, so of course he can look up and down, a really good distance up and down, which is pretty wonderful really, so no complaints here whatsoever. He's got the ball jointed shoulders, so of course they kick up and out a really healthy distance. He's got the bicep swivel as well as the double jointed elbows, and of course he's got the pin swivel at the wrist there, so of course they rotate 360 degrees and they arch in and out as well, which is brilliant. Now, he also has a swivel at the waist, which is great, so he moves from side to side, but you'll notice he also has that upper ab crunch as well, so he can bend forward a pretty good distance, that's pretty clear. Bending backwards, not so much, and it's not just the lab coat. I tested it without, and it is pretty much the same. He can't really get a good deal backwards, but he can bend forward, which is fine. He's got the swivel at the upper thigh, and of course there's also the ball jointed hips there, so of course they arc out to the side as well. Although something with this mould that I'm not overly a fan of, and it's the same with the Spider-Man figures, is that the plastic tends to be very rubbery, so the legs tend to bend rather than just staying firm. And of course they also kick out all the way there as well, and they just arc all the way back as well, so yeah, no problems with the leg articulation on this figure at all. He's also got the double jointed knees, of course, so of course they bend right the way back, and he has the ankle pivot as well, which of course allows the foot to swivel from side to side and arc upwards and downwards as well, which is fantastic. Sadly though, he doesn't have a boot cut at the lower calf, so there's no swivel there, which is a shame. Seems like a missed opportunity. And in terms of accessories, aside from the lab coat, he also comes with an extra pair of arms and outstretched hands, which is pretty cool, and these are all interchangeable. And this definitely creates a whole wealth of opportunities for different looks and poses, and I think it's pretty successful. I really like this swap and change, mix and match approach. So overall, I'm probably going to say 3 stars for Mr. Fantastic. Whilst I really like this figure and I love the character, and I think the head sculpt is really good, and obviously I love that he's meant to represent the animated series or the 90s Mr. Fantastic, which is great. I really like the interchangeable coat. I think that's really a fantastic idea, and having those different arms to have some different looks, I think all that is really great stuff. What lets the figure down, though, in my opinion, is that I think the blue is a little bit too dark. I think obviously on mine I have that scratch mark, but I'm not going to take that into consideration here because I'm sure that's just a goof on my version. But I think really it comes down to the mold they've gone for, and there's nothing wrong with the mold, but it's more the materials and the texture of it. Just I wish it was a bit more solid, a bit harder, and I wish with the lab coat, I just wish there was a paint wash running through that to make it look less toyetic, I suppose, and just a little bit more detailed, a bit more worn, a bit more realistic. And maybe for accessories, it might have been nice to have, say, a couple of test tubes or some gadget or gizmo, and maybe something different rather than having the two outstretched hands. Maybe have one of them and something different for the other hand. I don't know, outstretched fist or something like that. That would have been kind of cool. Next up, we have, and making his Marvel Legends debut, Psycho Man. This is a really cool release for several different reasons. A, yeah, absolutely, because he's never seen live in the Marvel Legends line before. And B, to the best of my knowledge, I think that this is an all-new sculpt head to toe. Now, I could be wrong, maybe the legs have been used elsewhere before, but certainly the head sculpt, of course, is brand new, but also the torso. I don't recognise any of these pieces at all, and I think they've done a really pretty solid job with them, to be honest. Now, I might be critical of the white parts of the costume because there isn't really a lot of detailing, although the sculpt is very nice. There's no paint wash going over them to really accentuate all the grooves. But I think the real saving grace of this figure is the green metallic paint that's been used over all the piping. It's absolutely fantastic. And speaking of this piping, I thought this would be plastic. It's actually rubber pieces, so they're a little bit flexible, they're quite a nice texture, and they work really well with the figure and the sculpt. So they aid the articulation, they don't hinder it, and it looks pretty cool, I have to say. It actually looks a lot better in the flesh than it did in the photos. And as I hinted at, the articulation on his figure is pretty solid. So he has a ball jointed neck, his head can spin from side to side, and there's even a little bit a give to let him look up and down as well, which is kind of unexpected given this mold. I didn't think the helmet would really have a lot of motion there, but it does, which is great. Ball jointed shoulders, of course. He's got the bicep swivel there, which is great. Double jointed elbows, and he's got the pin swivel for the wrist as well. And as I said, that green metallic paint just looks so good, and we've seen that a few times this year, and it always works really well for me. He's got the swivel at the waist, of course, so of course he can rotate from side to side, but there's also a little bit of a hinge there that allows him to sort of arch forwards and backwards a little bit as well. He's got the ball jointed hips, so of course the legs kick out, and again, no real hindrance here as I thought there might be, so there's no problems with the articulation. He's also got the upper thigh swivel there as well. Again, no hindrance from the piping at all, which is great. His legs kick out a pretty decent distance, and they don't really go back too far, to be fair. He's got double jointed knees, and he's also got the ankle pivot as well, so of course that slides from side to side and up and down, and again, no problems here with the piping at all. It all works really well. It's very complimentary, which is fantastic. In terms of accessories, he just comes with the one, which is his fear machine. I forget what it's actually called, that's what I call it. The design is nice and simple, it replicates what we are used to seeing, so I think it's fine, and it's nice that they've got the three buttons on there, fear, doubt and hate, which is pretty cool. The sculpt is great. Again, it's very basic though in terms of paint apps. It could have done with maybe a wash over there just to give it a little bit more texture. But one of the criticisms I have of this figure is that he can't hold this one accessory. So his hand does seem to be sculpted quite wide with a nice wide grip, but as you can see, it's just too thick. He can't hold it. So there's no way he can actually grip this. The other hand, of course, is a fist. There's no alternative hands to play around with, so he can't really grip this too well, to be honest, or even at all. You're really going to have to rely on gravity, and it's just going to look a little bit silly held like that all the time. So yeah, this definitely is going to cost it a star, I think. Best I can give is a 3. This obviously is a massive miss right here. I think overall I'm really glad to have this character. I think they've done a pretty good job. I really love the metallic paint, but it's a shame there isn't a little bit more shading on his costume throughout, really. And finally, we have the High Evolutionary, also making his Marvel Legends debut, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, I don't ever tend to think of the High Evolutionary as a Fantastic Four villain. I tend to think of him more being involved with the X-Men and the Avengers, but nevertheless, I'm really glad to have him in this line. I think they've done a really nice job of the head sculpt. There's loads of little details in here which are really nicely done. Again, maybe it would have been nice to have a slightly different paint wash over it just to accentuate some of these grooves, but nevertheless, I think the sculpt itself is pretty fantastic really, so yeah, top marks for this. And I think they've done a really nice job of the body sculpt as well. The actual arms and the legs are actually grooved with those lines there, so you know it's nicely textured, nicely painted as well, and there does seem to be a wash going through this, so it's not just one tone of silver, there's kind of a blue wash running through as well. And also he has this fantastic rubber piece going across the body, across the torso, and underneath in this sort of like tunic-y bit, and this works really well. It's like a nice soft rubber, but it's firm enough to hold its shape, which is great. And again, it's nicely sculpted, some nice detail in there. It would have been nice to have just accentuated that again with a paint wash rather than just being one tone, but nevertheless the sculpt itself pretty solid. The articulation scheme here is exactly the same as the others. It's got that ball jointed neck, no issues whatsoever. He can spin right the way around, look up and down a really healthy distance, pretty solid stuff. Now he's also got the ball jointed shoulders, he's got the bicep swivel, the double jointed elbows, and he's got the pin swivel for the wrist as well. So all fantastic, couldn't really be improved upon, to be honest. There's no hindrance here whatsoever, and it all works and looks pretty decent. He's also got that ball jointed chest, which is fantastic. It allows him to look from side to side, but also arc inwards from side to side as well, which is brilliant. So I really like this. He's also got a swivel at the waist as well, so again he can move from side to side down here as well, which is great. And of course the rubber robe there is quite malleable, so it works with the articulation and not against it, which is great. Once again, he's got the ball jointed hips, so his legs kick out. He's got the upper thigh swivel there as well, and the legs kick forwards and backwards with no hindrance there at all. Really good range of motion on this character, which is great. Double jointed knees, of course. He's got the boot swivel as well, so this can move from side to side there, which is nice. And he's also got the ankle pivot as well, so of course the foot arcs up and down, but also pivots from side to side, which is great. So pretty solid articulation on this figure. Sadly, in terms of extras, he is very light. He just comes with a closed fist and open hand, which is a little bit disappointing. Again, it would have been nice if there was some sort of signature prop that they could have used here, some bit of tech or equipment, or you know, some lab equipment, something like that would have been kind of cool. Sadly, very limited. All in all, I'm going to say probably another 3 from me for this figure. I think the sculpt is really very nice. Again, I just think it could have done with a little bit more of a paint wash running throughout the torso of this figure, just to enhance some of the detailing that they've sculpted in there and just really bring that to life. Also, the lack of accessories is kind of disappointing with this figure. He's definitely one who would have benefited from having a few extra goodies in there. And the last thing I'm going to pick up on is the height of the figure. Now, he's always seemed like a character who would be slightly taller than the rest of the Marvel Universe. When I had a look at the Marvel wiki page, it did say he's roughly 6'2", but his height is variable. So I suppose there's a little bit of ground there, artistic license. But that said, he's basically the same size as Reed Richards in figure form, and that doesn't look quite right. He should be a good bit taller, really. So it's a bit of a shame that isn't quite accurate. But overall, and despite many of these having 3 stars, that doesn't mean that these are bad figures by any stretch of the imagination. These are all really solid additions to the collection, and I really love this wave. I'm really pleased to actually have some brand new characters in the Marvel Legends line. It's brilliant. Having Psycho Man and High Evolutionary, these aren't characters I ever considered before, and I'm really glad to have them now. It definitely fleshes out the collection. Nice to have some extra villains in there. Really good. So definitely Hasbro get top marks for this. In terms of the Fantastic Four figures, here we have the Thing and Mr. Fantastic. I think they've done a really good job with them. The Thing is my personal favourite. I think if you've collected these before in other formats, then maybe they're not going to be as big a sell to you, especially if you're not keen on either the animated series or the 90s costumes. For me, this is kind of the definitive look. This is how I think about the Fantastic Four in the blue and the white, so it's a definite must-buy for me. I'm really delighted with the results, and yeah, like I said, I think this might be my favourite Thing figure to date, which is high praise indeed. So yeah, really solid wave, and I'm looking forward to getting the others in the wave and some of those special variants that are coming as well. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.